Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. We're here live on Wednesday afternoon, May 1st. Today is also the last day that the transfer portal is open. We have under 12 hours now before that closes, which certainly is bringing on some craziness here today. And as we give some people some time to join us here for today's episode, just a little housekeeping off the top, as always. First and foremost, thank you for being here for today's episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. If you are watching, whether it be live or sometime in the future, please make sure you are subscribed here to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. We host these live episodes every Wednesday afternoon at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on Spotify or wherever you do listen to your podcast episodes. Those go up every Monday and Friday. We have some guests lined up throughout the off season, which should make those episodes a lot of fun. And then also, as always, please make sure you are following me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. That's where you can catch any and all of my content, whether it be my written work, which is all on KentuckySportsRadio.com, part of the On3 Sports Network, this YouTube show, the podcast, all of that good stuff. All that good stuff gets promoted on my Twitter account. Again, that's at BRamseyKSR. But if you're tuning into this, probably a big reason is because we have a lot to talk about within Big Blue Nation. As you can tell from the stuff around me, I am a Kentucky fan. Again, work for Kentucky Sports Radio as well. And we just got a boom tweet, which is a big deal now in Kentucky basketball circles. It is certainly assumed, and I'm going to have to kind of multitask a little bit here throughout today's live show. Going to have to be checking Twitter a little bit to see what all's going on. We obviously assume that this first boom tweet, and I say first, I'll touch on that in a second. We assume this boom tweet has to do with Kobe Bryant, the Dayton transfer that just recently finished up a visit on campus. However, Kyle Tucker of The Athletic, who covers the Kentucky basketball beat, recently just tweeted out that he says there are two booms today for Kentucky, I am told. So we will obviously see what ends up coming of that. But I would certainly assume that this first one is Kobe Bryant. That was kind of imminent. It felt like, and it was interesting how that recruitment all went down. I guess we can go ahead and touch on that for a second. How a week or two ago, whenever it was, he put out this blue blood top five, final five list of Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, North Carolina, and UConn, I believe it was. And so that, I mean, that house is as powerhouse of a top five as you can possibly have. And then down the road, we got to the point where he had announced visits to Duke and UConn. And we kind of left it at that for a minute. But then I think it was like later that day, probably about a week or so ago now, where it turned into those were going to be the only two visits. So he went to Stores and then ended up canceling the visit to Durham and adding in a visit to Lexington. So we went from a final five to kind of a final two, nixed one of those and added in a new second school in Kentucky. And then it kind of, UConn took Aiden Mahaney, and that kind of seemed to signal that Kobe Bryant would end up in Lexington, which was obviously interesting since, before that, kind of thought we were out for him. So things are obviously very fluid, as Coach Mark Pope talked about on Kentucky Sports Radio earlier this week, how the big board is a fluid living organism. Names are constantly coming onto the board and leaving the board, and we've certainly seen that firsthand this week as Kentucky fans. So we're going to dive into the roster a little bit, where things stand, this recent run of commitments, and certainly, some of these more commitments that are imminent to be announced today. Like I said, I'm going to continue to check Twitter here just to see if anything official happens. But again, we did get a boom tweet here recently, which seems to signal Kobe Bryant becoming a Wildcat. A couple comments here from Rolando Thacker. Matt Jones just said it's a big day. Yeah, I saw that for Kentucky basketball. Saw that tweet as well. Certainly appears to be some people in the know that know of something more to come. Harrison Burchett says, appreciate the show, man. Tuning in from Las Vegas, double boom time. Hey, I wish I was in Las Vegas right now, but appreciate you tuning in, Harrison. So over the weekend, Kentucky got 3 commitments: Lamont Butler, Otega Owe, and then Andrew Carr. So that doubled the roster from 3 to 6 just over the weekend. Obviously, we are all very anxious during this roster building process, and understandably so. That just comes with the territory of caring a lot, and even for Kentucky fans that are used to a high level of off-season turnover, the one and done system under Coach Calipari lended itself to a lot of off seasons where it was sort of, you know, 6, 7 guys going out, 6 or 7 guys coming in. However, because of the traditional recruiting process, you sort of always knew who they were, or at least had a pretty darn good feel for. But by this time of the year, like these recruits would commit throughout the course of their senior year, and generally by the time the college season was over, and players made their NBA decisions or whatever, you kind of knew who was replacing them. This is a completely different animal where literally Coach Pope's introduced, and he's like that Will Smith gif where he's just kind of looking around the room like, all right, what I have 13 spots to fill here, pretty much from day one. And I likened it recently. I think on my show Monday, I talked about how there's really almost an expansion team aspect to this year's Kentucky roster, like all new coaching staff, all new roster, as if we're just building from scratch. Now, luckily, the program foundation and framework of Kentucky basketball carries a lot of weight. So, you're kind of you're starting on second or third base here a little bit in terms of just your ability to attract players, and getting a big NIL commitment with the hiring of Coach Pope certainly has helped facilitate some of that as well. But with the recent boom tweet, it looks like we're going to be at 8 guys on the roster. Just quickly run through them. You have Kobe Brea, if we're assuming he's this first commitment. Again, hopefully first of 2, it sounds like, coming today. Lamont Butler from San Diego State, Andrew Carr from Wake Forest, Colin Chandler, the former BYU signee who's following Coach Pope to Lexington, Brandon Garrison from Oklahoma State, Otega Owe from Oklahoma, Travis Perry, the kid obviously from Kentucky, and then Amari Williams, the 3-time CAA Defensive Player of the Year from Drexel. Common theme among these guys, and Evan Miyakawa had a good tweet about this recently. Common theme among these players are how good they are defensively. You have Lamont Butler, arguably the best perimeter defender in the transfer portal, now coming to Kentucky. Amari Williams, arguably the best interior defender, now coming to Kentucky. Otega Owe, another high-level perimeter defender. Brandon Garrison, another high-level interior defender. Andrew Carr, even a guy that averaged 1.5 blocks per game last season. I think it's interesting because, again, something I've talked about a lot. When Coach Mark Pope got the job, we as Kentucky fans, we all start diving into the BYU film, and we're watching the Jordan Sperber's video, how BYU plays like a video game, and all that good stuff, and we're getting excited about what this offense is going to look like. But I think part of us, and it's easy to get caught up in, but I think we all kind of forgot about some of the things we wanted when the season stopped. When this past season ended the way that it did, we wanted to get better defensively. We wanted to get older. We wanted to get more physical. And I think that you kind of have to trust, because of all those things that we watched and we saw how good BYU was offensively last season and some of the numbers they put up, we kind of have to trust that Coach Pope is going to coach the offense. But he needed to shore up things on the defensive side of the ball, because obviously that was an issue for Kentucky last season. It's never necessarily been a strength of his teams between Utah Valley and BYU. So now you go out and you get so many of these high-level defensive guys that certainly aren't slouches or aren't, in the way offensively, but they're probably just, as much, if not more so, known for their defense than they are their offense. And I think it's going to give Kentucky in year one under Coach Pope a higher floor of what we have to build on. Because again, I have complete trust in what he can build and scheme offensively. But sometimes it can just be hard to teach, especially with transfers that are, older guys. Like it can be hard to all of a sudden teach a 22-year-old with 4 years of college basketball under the belt how to be a good defender. So just go out and get them. And Kentucky has certainly done that to this point, it seems. Before we get any further, again, appreciate those who are watching live. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to throw them into the chat, and I will answer them at some point before we get off here today. But one thing I do want to touch on is the Great Osabor situation at Kentucky and kind of my take on how all of that went down. Now, those of you that know me, I'm not an insider. I don't claim to have any knowledge. I'm not even a fake insider. I am very open about the fact that I'm not in the inner workings. I'm not Jack Pilgrim. I'm not Matt Jones. I'm not these other people that Kyle Tucker. I'm not these guys that have inner circle knowledge of what's going on within the walls at Kentucky. However, having coached college basketball myself, I have, and still being very involved in the recruiting world, running a scouting service. I just have I have a little bit of an understanding of how recruiting works and maybe how some of these conversations or decisions get made. And to me, again, outside looking in, and Jack seemed to maybe confirm a little bit of this with some comments he had on KS Board after I put out my sort of theory. But obviously, Kentucky wanted Great Osabor. And I think there was a time when Great Osabor essentially had said he was coming. And then he wanted to take some other visits, see what else was out there. And Kentucky was like, well, okay, we want you. We're going to want you at any point in this process. But if you're going to date other people, then we are too. And we're going to have to, do our due diligence and see what else is out there. I think that then took Kentucky to Brandon Garrison. And I think that maybe there was a speed of making that decision that maybe Coach Pope and Kentucky wasn't prepared for. And again, this is all speculation, just kind of reading the tea leaves from my point of view. And when Brandon Garrison was on the phone and it was like, oh shoot, like he's ready to commit to Kentucky, but Great Osabor is literally on campus as this is happening. So I have a feeling, everybody kind of convenes. We have a meeting of the minds. All right, what are we going to do? Are we going to tell Brandon Garrison he can't commit right now because we want Great Osabor? Or are we going to put the ball in Great Osabor's court? I think they maybe went and put the ball in his court a little bit and said, hey, we want you. We want you right now. We want you to not take these other visits. We have a guy that we like on the hook that's ready to commit, but we want that spot to be yours. Are you ready? He pretty clearly said he wasn't ready. He wanted to take these other visits, which I can understand. And again, to me, he's worth waiting for. And I think that at that point, Kentucky said, okay, well, we still want you, but we're going to go ahead and take Brandon Garrison. And then I think Great Osabor at that point has said, okay, no hard feelings, but this is probably not going to be the place for me. And, you can argue how it should have went down or how you or I would have handled it, but I think there's a pretty safe bet that something along those lines went down. Again, no knowledge of the situation, just reading the tea leaves, having an understanding of how the inner workings of these things take place sometimes. I could see that sort of being the story, and to me the timeline adds up for that sort of a thing. Rolando asks, who are your thoughts on the second boom? Man, that's a good question. And I think that we're seeing throughout this recruiting cycle for Kentucky how it has been silent at times. Like the Lamont Butler commitment kind of came out of left field a little bit. Like, heck, he wasn't even who we thought we were flying out west to go see, and then all of a sudden he's making a commitment. When you land Brandon Garrison yesterday, that was Tuesday morning. Like, none of us really saw that coming. We all probably thought that it would be Kobe Bryant when that happened, but instead, or Great Osabor, honestly, ends up being Brandon Garrison. Yeah, Rolando throws in. I'm thinking Robinson. Robinson probably makes the most sense. I guess I would be a little bit surprised if he didn't play out the draft process a little bit longer, I guess, but certainly wouldn't be shocking, especially because, again, if you read the tea leaves a little bit and, from an NIL perspective, and I think that's the other thing people have to think about is, now you're operating kind of with some with some set resources. And I've talked about resource management a little bit on Twitter, again at BRamseyKSR, and how it's not always kind of a one for one apples to apples comparison. Now you have to take things into consideration of, and again, I'm just going to throw out some numbers here, but like if you get Grado Sabor for 1 year and $500,000, there's a value to that that's different than just Grado Sabor compared to you can get Brandon Garrison for maybe $150,000 and 3 years. So like now all of a sudden, like there's a value proposition that's a little bit different than just in a vacuum. Who would I rather have, Grado Sabor or Brandon Garrison? Because now one is potentially a 3 year guy, one is a 1 year guy. One guy is more expensive than the other, and maybe then would you rather take Brandon Garrison and then be able to shift resources somewhere else? And that's why maybe it is kind of a quicker commitment from a guy like Jackson Robinson, because maybe now you push your chips in a little bit and you take some of that Great Osabor money, and now you can send that and again shift the resources from Great Osabor to Jackson Robinson. Or sure, it could be a guy like Wooga Poplar, who has been catching a lot of buzz here lately. Like maybe you start to get some things figured out in admissions with Davion Smith. I mean, Kadari Richmond's been a name thrown around some as well. And the North Florida kid, Chaz Lanier. There's plenty of names. I mean, it's all pure speculation at this point, and I think that that's certainly not new for this cycle. We've seen that some of these things kind of happen in silence a little bit, and I think that's a good thing, especially because of the NIL aspect of this. Like, you want to get people for the best price, and sometimes having it be quiet before people can drive up that price is the best way to do it. So again, I keep kind of refreshing Twitter here to see where things stand currently. I am seeing now that Florida Atlantic transfer John L. Davis has officially committed to Arkansas. Really, no surprise there. Nothing else. We're just living in a world of boom tweets here within Big Blue Nation. But let's talk about some of the other names that remain on the Kentucky office big board. And we'll sort of go position by position here. In the backcourt, kind of more point guard, which is certainly a position of need, I think, for Kentucky at this point. Lamont Butler is a very capable point guard, but again, these last couple of years at San Diego State, when the Aztecs had so much success making it to a national championship game, then making it to a Sweet 16, he played alongside another playmaker in Darion Trammell, who's a 5'10" little jitterbug guard who was just as high as, but both Butler and Trammell last season were 21.6% assist rate for the Aztecs, and the year before that they were similar as well. So he's been at his most effective when playing with another similar playmaker. So you're looking at guys like Kadari Richmond, who are like 7 rebounds and like 15 to 16 points per game last year. Then there's the Davon Smith kid from Utah, who I think there's different levels of academic concerns with him. Again, not so much about like, well, he's been flunking all of his classes or anything, but just he's a transferred 3 or 4 times now, so things just get a little hairy with transcripts and with credits transferring and all of that. So how likely he may or may not fit into this equation remains to be seen. A name that I like a lot, and I've seen kind of thrown around, but I haven't necessarily seen any legitimate interest linked, is Jordan Ivan Curry from Texas San Antonio. To me, he's a playmaker that could play there in the backcourt as well. But I think that, and I saw this tweet, I think from like Isaac Trotter at 247 Sports, he had a list of kind of the top portal players at each position, and point guard was the deepest list. And that's something I've talked about quite a bit as Kentucky fans. Again, this are generally anxious people, and I'm there with y'all, but I'm not as worried about finding that point guard, because I think Lamont Butler can do it if need be. But even to the extent that you need a backup or you need somebody for him to play along with, like, point guard is such a deep position right now in the portal. And sure, there's levels to it, just like anything. And already Aiden Mahaney going elsewhere, John Davis going elsewhere, Elijah Hawkins going elsewhere. Some of those names start to dwindle, but still, again, Richmond, Smith, those guys are high level point guards. Jordan Ivan Curry, another example, and the list goes on further down. The guys you would still be very happy with if you were a Kentucky fan. I think at the two, more of a true kind of one for one to some extent replacement for Antonio Reeves. Not saying he's going to come in and be an All American, but Chaz Lanier guy at North Florida, he was a dude that when you looked at the shooting numbers last year, and you're kind of seeing, where's Antonio Reeves, where's Reed Shepherd, all these guys ranked nationally in shooting. Like Lanier was a name that was there all season long. Compared to Kobe Bryant, made 96 threes. Bryant made it 100. Bryant was 49.8% from three. Lanier was like 45% from three. So again, one of the very best shooters in college basketball. 6'4", does a lot of things off the dribble too. Like he was 60% from 2-point range. He was like 88% from the free throw range. We're talking about a legitimate 50, 40, 90 type of guy that could come in and average a lot of points and make a lot of threes for Kentucky. Then out on the wing, we certainly know about Jackson Robinson. We know about Luka Poplar, what those guys could bring to the table. Then there's some more names that haven't necessarily been linked to Kentucky just yet, but certainly get thrown around. Arthur Kaluma being one of those. Max Shulga from VCU, previously from Utah State, somebody that Coach Pope would certainly be familiar with from his time in Mountain West. Just recently today, even again with less than 12 hours before the portal closes, Vin Allen Lubin to me is a potential backup front court piece from Vanderbilt. Trevon Brazil entered the portal as well. To me, he's not so much a take for Kentucky, but certainly a talented player that is still going into the portal. TJ Power from Duke would be one I would look at as well for a backup 4 spot. To me, he fits that mold of Andrew Carr. That would be a perfect complementary backup for him there. And that leads me to something that I talked about on Twitter, again, at BRamseyKSR earlier today, of sort of my priorities for Kentucky and their roster building process going forward. I think a lot of people would agree we need a point guard in some capacity. We still need to add a point guard, and I think we will certainly, but that's one of the priorities. Then I said that I want 2 of the following 3. I'd probably now add a name and some 2 of these 4 of Chaz Lanier, Kobe Bryant, Jackson Robinson, Luka Poplar. I want 2 of those 4 guys. Sounds like we very well could be getting or have already gotten Kobe Bryant. We'll see what happens. But I think if you get 2 of those 4, again, that's Bryant, Lanier, Robinson, Poplar. I think if you get 2 of those 4, you're in really good shape. And then you add a backup 4-man to back up Andrew Carr, preferably one that can shoot similar to him. So if you get all of those spots, that's 4 more names added to a list of 7. So now you're to 11, and you start to be, in pretty darn good shape. If I'm getting greedy, how do you add like those 12th and 13th guys? I probably go kind of project 5-man, somebody in the Ugana Onyenso mold, and then I probably go, another point guard, honestly, just to add some more, or just a shooter. So I would say project 5-man for one of those last 2 spots, and then quote unquote project point guard or just high level shooter to throw in there as well for a 13th spot. But to me, that's kind of where we stand in this roster building process. Again, certainly sounds like there's good news coming down the pike today. And one thing before we go here, I just have to talk about Kobe Bryant a little bit. It's easy to pigeonhole him, and I've been writing my KSR film room on him actually this morning. It's been funny with I was in the gym all weekend covering a tournament in Indianapolis, 12 plus hour days in the gym, and we rattle off 3 commitments. So I felt very, very behind in terms of keeping up with all this stuff. Like I'm obviously keeping up with it. I just simply didn't have time to watch film and write over the weekend. So I finally last night at about 10 o'clock, I got the Brandon Garrison film room posted. So I was up to date. So I immediately went to work, kind of, somewhat knowing that Brea was to come. Started watching. I spent last night watching film. This morning, starting to write the article. So I'm in a little bit better shape. I'll be finishing that once we get off here. But I mean, his synergy page, my goodness, like it is astronomically impressive. Let's just run through a few of the points on his synergy page. Just in terms of all offensive possessions, averaged 1.331 points per possession. That rates as excellent, 100th percentile in college basketball. I believe he was 21st overall. In transition, 99th percentile. You go a little bit deeper here. In spot up opportunities, 99th percentile. As the pick and roll ball handler, that's a really impressive one. This is a guy that, it's easy to pigeonhole him as this, like, just catch and shoot, dead eye shooter. As a pick and roll ball handler, 98th percentile in all of college basketball. Now, he's still very 3-point dominant of those shots. I mean, as they pick and roll ball handler last season, 43s, making half of them, and only 15 twos, making 2/3 of them. So he's still creating threes. I mean, I think he is a little bit. This is a bad name for Kentucky fans, but a little bit of Jack Golke to it. Not that extreme, but dude took like 45 twos last season and 200 threes, 201 threes, I believe. So he's not going to take very many twos, but he can create his own threes, which is huge, really, really important for your offense. Coming off of screens, so like off-ball screening action, 90th percentile in the country. Again, still rates as excellent on synergy. Then in transition, I already mentioned 99th percentile. Go to shot types. In catch and shoot opportunities, again, 100th percentile. I believe it was 18th nationally, averaging 1.61 points per possession off of the catch and shoot. 53.8% on catch and shoot threes last season. That was 132 attempts. When those attempts are unguarded, he's making just under 60% of his attempts. So to me, again, like it is mind-blowing, some of the stuff that is on his synergy page. And what I like is people are going to be very surprised about it. His shot creation. Now he does that off of screening action. Coach Pope is going to be, he's going to be like a kid in a candy shop scheming actions for this guy to come off of. But he's already very good in zoom action. Comes off, like you have to chase over the top. But because he's 6'6", like he can still squeeze it off. Anytime you get caught going under, anytime you get caught going up through screening action, he's going to spray it in. I mean, this is a high-level shooter. He's 6'6", and he's also like he can shoot the little pullback off the dribble. He can chop you up a little bit off of a ball screen and pull up from three. It's really impressive to watch. And he's a guy that doesn't necessarily dominate the ball. I mean, he really hasn't been a starter to this point in his career. So obviously, I think everybody that transfers probably wants something out of it, but I think that his want clearly was just to play at a little bit higher level, get out of the A10 and go play one of the best conferences, one of the best programs in the country. Just look at his Final Five. Clearly, that was something that meant a lot to him, and now he's going to get to prove himself as one of the best shooters in college basketball at one of the premier programs in college basketball. So really excited about what Kobe Bryant is going to bring. Well, again, hopefully we assume that's one of the boom tweets, but going to be interesting to see what that other one could mean. Is it Jackson Robinson? Is it a guy like Luka Pop, or is it somebody that we haven't even really thought about yet? I think that's a real possibility with how things have gone to this point. But I think that's really all we have for today's episode. If there's any last-minute comments, you can throw them in there, and I'll either just tack it on here if I still catch you while I'm live, or we'll answer it later on. But thank you all for tuning in today. These shows are always a lot more fun when I have a larger audience and people interacting. So thank you all for that. Please make sure you are subscribed to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel here. Like the video, leave a comment if you're watching this anytime in the future. And like I said, subscribe. You can also find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on podcast, on Spotify, wherever you listen to your shows. Again, new episodes every Monday and Friday morning. And then catch me on Twitter. Give me a follow there at BRamsey KSR. We will continue to monitor the coaching staff's Twitter accounts. Hopefully we get a second boom tweet coming today, but certainly an exciting time with this roster building process as a Kentucky fan, and we will continue to see how all of the pieces come together. So thank you all for tuning in, and have a great rest of your week.